Now, my great-grandfather, it's quite appropriate that they call it G.J. Walter Park because he was never really known as George. He was always affectionately known as G.J. by family friends, and even my great-grandmother called him G.J. To those who worked for him, he was called the boss, and there was no reference to Bruce Springsteen in those days, but that's how he was referred to, as the boss. In fact, my father, who was brought up by his grandfather, always referred to him as grandfather or the boss. So even though I didn't know my great-grandfather, I've always known and spoken about him as the boss. Anyway, cutting back to his story, he was a very community-minded man, and I think in about 1913 he was elected to the local council as a councillor. Later on, a few years later, he was elected as chairman, and that's a position that he held until his death in January 1944. I think a highlight of his time in that position was when the Duke of Gloucester visited Queensland in 1934 and paid a visit to Cleveland, and of course my great-grandfather thought there was nowhere on earth like Cleveland, so spent quite some time taking him around and showing him the attributes of this area. My great-grandfather was really a community-minded person. He was president of the local cricket club for 30 or 40 years. He was very heavily involved in the show society, and of course in those days the hub of Cleveland was really from the RSL, or behind the RSL, down to Paxton Street near the Courthouse restaurant where the train terminus was. And of course I think my great-grandfather's father had a butcher shop, which I believe was Shore Street North, just past the Grandview Hotel. So and shows were held on that lovely public ground area across the road from the Grandview. So, you know, this whole area was an integral part of Cleveland. In 1925, he saw the need for some health facilities in the area, and he built what was called St Anne's Private Hospital, and that hospital remained servicing the area until I think about the late 60s, early 70s. I know one young woman who was born there, I think in about 1967. I was born there, and I won't tell you the year. I was born there, and my two older brothers were both born there, and it was a wonderful thing. So I think GJ was the sort of man that if he sort of felt something was needed for the area or the community needed something, he got out there and he made it happen. He would be absolutely chuffed to know that this park is named after him. He loved this area. He loved the fishing from Cleveland. I can remember my godfather used to travel down from Brisbane. He was a family friend, and he and his wife would come down here at Easter and Christmas time, and they would camp under these beautiful Norfolk pines. They'd go out fishing in their little boat, and if I was lucky enough and the tide was right and I was here, I'd be out with them as well. And just so many wonderful times here. I learnt to swim on that lovely beach there. It was a sandy beach in my time because of course the barges hadn't come to Cleveland and the dredging hadn't begun, so it was fairly pristine in this area. I mean, it was always mud out to Cassam. My older brother John and his friends used to, at low tide apparently, go out to Cassam Island, and I think one of their friends thought it'd be a great place to build a cubby house until I sort of reminded him, well, that's a bit silly because the tide actually does come in and your cubby house would kind of end up going whichever way the prevailing winds were blown. But from our family's point of view, and I'm sure many of you, I was talking to Esme Whitby before, another one of our lovely older residents of the area. She called it Grandma's Beach because this is where she used to bring her grandchildren over a number of years down here. And I think many of us have had beautiful and wonderful times here. And to be honest, the thought that they could take over this beautiful park and build high-rise on this parkland, I mean, we were told at the community workshop that some of the buildings, we look at the height of these pines now and we imagine they'd be much, much higher than that. They talk about the Grandview Hotel having to rename itself and be called the Grand Wall or just the Grand because they won't have any view. And I honestly think that, you know, there's areas where you can put that sort of development, but I personally feel that this is not one of them. And let's hope that it doesn't go ahead. Let's hope that all of our voices will be heard, and just keep working towards that to that end. So enough of that sort of talk, but I hope I've given you just a sketch of my great-grandfather. And, you know, I'm a proud Clevelander. I'm the fourth generation. We were born, bred, married, lived here. My husband John and I have had our business here for more than 30 years, and he's been here nearly 40, so he's starting to call himself a local, but I'm not sure on that one yet. And Gary mentioned that, you know, it is a celebration here for the number of years that this park has been a reserve and parks, and he'd like to sort of say, well, let's give it a happy birthday. And I guess from another point of view, my great-grandmother, GJ's wife, Agnes, it was actually her birthday today, so she was born on the 16th of March. So maybe when we sing happy birthday to GJ Walter Park, I'll have a little thought for great-grandmother Walter as well. So if I can get some voices behind me and we can sing happy birthday, let's give it a go.
Please join in.
Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday DJ Walter Clark, happy birthday to you. Thank you. Hooray! Hooray! Hooray!